I think there's three sets of people on LinkedIn, and I think they're kind of like not balancing these well enough. I think we need a little bit of all three. Outreach, content, and also personal branding. But what are your thoughts? What comes to mind? What jumps out at you out of those three strategies that people apply, Colin?
I see them all. One of the big things in my marketing career that I feel like I always kind of go back to is this concept of push versus pull marketing. Are you pushing messages out or are you trying to pull people in? And I'm not saying that there are a right or wrong answer to that, but both are arguably important, right? To get brand awareness, you want to push a lot of stuff out, but to get an audience, especially an engaged audience, you want to pull people in. So your tactics and content change depending on what you're trying to do. You could do outreach in a push style or a pull style. You could do content in a push style or a pull style, or you could do personal branding in a push or pull style. It's more about the messaging, the positioning, the cadence, the strategy that you're implementing. And I find that most people don't think about that side of it. And oftentimes I find that they're not doing a good enough balance. So they're pushing a lot of stuff that nobody really cares about. So it's just push, thinking that something magically is going to happen. Or they're trying a little bit, maybe like it's all pull, but it becomes a little too personal. So they're not really pushed. Like no one really understands. It comes across as like this person's only really talking about themselves. And I don't really understand what they offer, what they do. They're not pushing anything that even explains it. It's just, a personal blog. And again, I'm not saying one is not right or wrong. I think it's important to start with the end goal in mind. What conversions are you seeking? And what are you trying to use the platforms for? And then work backwards to kind of understand, well, what tactical strategies make the most sense to implement in like a push and pull style.
Yeah. Awesome. That comes back to pattern recognition that you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's kind of tagged in a little bit.
Yeah, and also reflective, right? Because it's an iterative process to be able to kind of see, depending on the market, like what's the right balance. Like for some of my clients, like the way I think about it when I'm either doing ghostwriting or kind of helping craft post or content, it's always, I think people like behind the scenes type stuff. So to your point of just some rawness, I think people like that. But if you want to polish up that's fine in like a personal brand way. But, having some authenticity around like what you're doing behind the scenes. I see this a lot where people will have high resolution imagery that look like a professional of like an event that they did. And they're pushing out all like professional events. But I view that as like somewhat interesting because you get behind the scenes type stuff. But when you only do that and you don't share any stories, like it's hard to pull people in because I see it, but I don't really care or know. It looks like they had a great event. That's the way I feel when I see that, but I don't really know anything about them. So I also like when then people share some stories in their posts about lessons learned, something that they had to overcome, how they were thinking one way about a particular event and it shifted into like meaning something differently in their career or in their engagement with their employee or their client. I find that type of stuff interesting. I actually feel like I get to know that person through writing a lot easier, that they're more enjoyable to follow. But you see one's like a push style and one's a pull style. And I think it's kind of nice to have both of those elements in a personal brand. To be honest, I find that most people don't even really think that way. They just don't, whenever I kind of talk to them, they're either just pushing stuff with no pull, or they're pulling really hard and not having a balance. And it's, what they're pulling is not that what they think that they're pulling from a storytelling standpoint is not that interesting, or it's kind of the same thing over and over again. There's no diversity of thought or opinion to make them feel like they're a more well-rounded human being.
Yeah, that's major, Colin. I've been so guilty. I've been more of a push strategy because of my line of work, marketing campaigns, automation, that kind of stuff. So I'm literally paid to push, paid to push. But I've been recently learning that it's so important to bring in some pull elements as well, meaning create content. I think content is a great way to pull.
Yeah.
Outreach pushes. I think outreach can also pull if your messaging is very inviting. But I think content also pulls very well. And so there needs to be some kind of a balance. And then maybe right in the middle there is your personal brand. I think that kind of helps people to experience you before their money is on the line, right? Before their credit
Yeah.
card is on the line, before they're supposed to pay for a service or something. Because people want to know that they know who they're spending their money with to validate that they're making a good decision, right? Like who's gonna admit to spending money with somebody they don't even know or trust, right? That doesn't even begin to make sense. So people need a reason to say yes, I'm making a good financial decision by purchasing this service or purchasing this person's product because I know them. I've seen their content. I know their personality. I can trust them. They're good at what they do. I like their content, and so I'm gonna put my money on the line. So I think I think that's missing from the I guess the strategies a lot of people put out there. Now, that little piece right there that influences the buying decision. I think that's missing. You know.
I agree. I always like to tell people when I'm trying to training them about LinkedIn, especially like in the DMs, like how do you have good, thoughtful, productive, progressive conversations in the DMs? I always equate it to if you watch like a ballroom dance or like two partners dancing. This is where the concept of like I think about push and pull. The beauty in their performance is in the fact that they change it up and they're doing it they're playing off of one another. So you can't always if a dancer was always doing one type of thing to one tempo for let's say 2 minutes straight, 3 minutes straight, as the audience you would get a little bored of what they're doing and not really understand what you're watching. But the fact that they change up the tempo and they do some push, they do some pull, they do some throwing up in the air, all of a sudden you become a more captive audience by at the end of it, you're like, I'm pleased with what I just witnessed. Then you applaud because you kind of see the art of what they're doing in doing it together. Now, when you try to apply that to a conversation, you want to have a combination of push and pull, right? Yes, you need to push out a connection and not push out your offer, but push out the ability of desire to connect. And then you want to try to pull people in once they connect with you by maybe introducing yourself or asking them a question, right? Because you're curious about the other person. So you're pulling them in. So you push something out, you pull them in, and then you might, depending on the dance that happens, it might make sense to push something again and then maybe pull again and then push, and then pull. And then eventually after it kind of dies down, if you want to push and pull, you might share an article, something value driven to say, hey, I saw you, right? I'm going to push this out, but the goal is to pull you in. The art of being able to do that somewhat successfully is what allows people to feel like they get to know you through the subtleties in the similar way that you're like an audience is watching your performance. I feel like people don't think of a conversation like a dance, and they're thinking of it more as a solo performance versus realizing that there's a partner that you're interacting with, right? This isn't a stage for you to dance and think that somebody's going to say, oh, I'm going to read all of this. Let me stand up and clap. It's thinking about it like a ballroom dance, and you're trying to dance with a partner here. So the audience, if somebody was watching this conversation, are they captivated by what's happening? And if the answer is no, you should probably rethink maybe some of this pull and push strategies of how you're going about that.